Okay, guys, I'm going to split this reading into two. So we're going to begin reading Benedict Arnold, Two Sides of a Bitter Coin by David Wright. It was written in 2014. If you look at this, it said Benedict Arnold, 1741 to 1801, was an American general during the American Revolutionary War. He originally fought for the colonist Continental Army, but later defeated the British, but later defected to the British Army. Today, the name Benedict Arnold has become synonymous with treason and betrayal. As you read, take notes on what's led to Arnold's change of loyalties. And you don't have to do that because we've already done the video on him and some pre-reading stuff. So we're just going to begin reading. So this story is divided into three parts. The part one is Rise to Fame. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. All right. Benedict Arnold was the product of a proud family upbringing, and his pride, and this pride was instilled in him by his family, would temper his outlook and actions for the rest of his life. He built himself into a genuine war hero, then died penniless in exile from the country he once loved. An intensely loyal and brave man, he made a brilliant battlefield commander, but once spurned, turned his back on the country that put its faith in him and is forevermore remembered as a traitor. So spurn has a footnote beside it, and when you go down to the footnotes, you see that spurn means to reject with disdain or to insult, to look down upon. So we already talked about in the video how he felt he was passed over, and so once he was spurned, it was like he was kind of bratty and turned his back on his country. Arnold was born in 1741 in Connecticut. He was one of 6 children and only 2 who survived to adulthood. The other 4 died of yellow fever. His great-grandfather was an early governor of the Rhode Island colony. So Benedict came from a pretty prominent family, guys. His grandfather was a governor. It said in the first paragraph that, he had pride in his upbringing and it was instilled with him by his family. So that probably made him a little high on himself, thinking he was better than others. Arnold's family life wasn't the greatest, primarily because of a lack of money. Young Benedict found work as an apprentice to an apothecary, sort of a pharmacist back then, and he later had his own pharmacy business in addition to being a bookseller. So apothecaries back then were what you went to for a pharmacy. Mostly it was herbal medicinal stuff. And, that's what he chose his trade. Part 2, Wartime Heroics. Arnold enlisted in the militia and fought in the French and Indian War, which most of you should have went over with Miss Kearney. At the disastrous for the British and the Americans Battle of Fort William Henry. He returned to the business world with addition to his bookselling to his pharmacy trade. At this time, his surviving sister Hannah came to live with and work with him. She would continue to both after he got married in 1767. Arnold and his business suffered much from the implementation of the Stamp Act. So if you remember, we talked about how he did actually, when the Americans began this war, he did protest and he was against the Stamp Act and stuff. And he protested it by smuggling and by publicly calling for its repeal. It's taken back to be removed. Incensed by Great Britain's arrogance regarding taxation, Arnold joined the Sons of Liberty. So incensed means he was very angry at it. He was losing money from his business because Britain kept taxing them. And if you look down, the Stamp Act was a direct tax on the colonies by the British government. It was very unpopular. And the Sons of Liberty was a secret society formed to protect the colonists' rights and fight taxation. So he actually joined the original kind of people who started protesting Britain. We're going to go back to the reading. And it says, we're back here where it says desperate right here. Desperate to keep his business alive, he traveled to various ports, including the West Indies, where he was on the night of the Boston Massacre. So he didn't participate in the Boston Massacre, which you will be talking about with Miss Kearney. If you go down the Boston Massacre, Colonel March 5th, 1771, a group of British soldiers fired on an angry crowd, killing 5 and injuring others. So basically, it was a protest, and the British soldiers shot into the crowd. The incident strengthened Arnold's resolve to stand up for the rights of himself, his business, and his fellow Americans. When the call for volunteers for state militia went out, Arnold answered, becoming a member of the Connecticut militia. Impressed with Arnold's plans to Fort Ticonderoga, I don't even know how to say it, Lord bless me, the Massachusetts militia gave Arnold the rank of colonel and to prove his daring raid on what was supposedly a well-defended British fort. In reality, it was just a skeleton crew that policed the fort and its surroundings, and Arnold and his force had little trouble seizing it. So basically, Arnold came up with this grand, elaborate plan to take over this fort that was very important, and it was supposed to be this daring move, so they promoted him to colonel, and, it was supposed to be heavily guarded, and then in reality, it wasn't. So it wasn't as big as it seemed, but hey, it got him kind of to be famous. Arnold had helped in this endeavor from Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys. Again, if you go down to the footnotes, the Green Mountain Boys are militia organized first, established in the late 1760s, led by Ethan Allen, who generally got most of the credit for his brilliant military success, despite the fact that Arnold devised the plan and led men to carry it out. This would not be the last time that Arnold would be in someone's shadow. So basically, Arnold came up with this plan, and Ethan Allen and his Green Mountain Boys kind of got credit for it, and it kind of made him mad. He wanted the glory. We're here where it says 10. After a dispute over leadership in the wake of the capture of Fort Ticonderoga, I can't even today, Ticonderoga, Arnold resigned his commission in the Massachusetts militia and returned home. His wife had died at home during his struggle to take the fort, and he mourned her death for a period of time. So he was angry, and so he said, you know what, guys, I'm out. Arnold couldn't stay away from the limelight long, however, and volunteered to take part in the expedition to invade Canada. Not liking the plan on offer, Arnold devised his own and sold it to the Continental Army commander, George Washington, who gave Arnold the title of colonel and more than 1,000 men. And as it turned out, both forces landed in Quebec and about the same time, and a fierce battle ensued. During the battle, Arnold was wounded in the leg, an injury that plagued him the rest of his life. So again, he comes up with this plan. George Washington, who was the leader and commander of the Continental Army, loved it and gave him permission. And when he landed in Quebec, which is in Canada, there was a huge fight, and, he got an injury, and he was almost kind of like a war hero. British troops held on to Quebec, and Arnold became military commander of American forces in Montreal. The city eventually returned to British control, and Arnold returned to the colonies to assume a role in protecting Rhode Island. Here again, Arnold, put in charge of the defense of the colony, was passed over for appointment to Major General, which others who had less military service received. So when he came back home after fighting valiantly and bravely in Quebec, he expected to take control of Rhode Island's command, and he didn't. He was passed over by people who weren't even qualified. Again, incensed, so again, he's angry. Arnold tried to resign, but Washington wouldn't accept the resignation, primarily because he knew that Arnold had battlefield smart. So again, he was mad again, kind of being petty, and was like, oh, I'm going to be done with this. But Washington is Washington, and Washington refused to take his resignation, and you just didn't mess with George Washington back in those days. Washington ordered Arnold to New York, where he eventually played a major part in the American victory in the Battle of Saratoga. Sorry if y'all hear my dogs in the back. I'm taping this at home. This was the victory that brought France into the war and on the side of the Americans. And Saratoga might have turned out differently if Arnold had followed his orders. A series of disputes between Arnold and a commanding general, Horatio Gates, resulted in Arnold being removed from his field command and confined to his quarters. During the battle, however, Arnold, despite Gates's orders to the contrary, rushed to the field and led the troops to victory. Gates was angry at Arnold, but not as angry as he would have been if the gamble hadn't worked. So basically, him and Gates got into this huge argument. Gates said, you know what, go to your room. Don't come out while we're fighting. And Arnold's like, sure, I'm going to come out and fight anyways. And he fought super heroically and was recognized and actually helped turn the tide of that victory. That victory was important because after the victory of Saratoga, France joined America, and America needed a little bit of help because British was an established country. And so this was a super huge, important thing that Arnold helped do. We're going to read the final choice tomorrow. I've attached the questions already if you want to go ahead and start on them. But other than that, you can finish reading today or tomorrow.